Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Agree to Disagree and Still Be Friends. I'm your host, Jason.
And I'm Robert.
And today we're talking about how disagreements evolve into danger.
Yeah, and I got another silly argument for serious people.
Oh.
And I was sifting through these, and this one, it was kind of, I was like, really? There's an argument on this one. It just kind of blew my mind a little bit. When you make a bowl of cereal, do you go cereal first and then milk? Or do you pour the milk first and put the cereal in? In my mind, that's always been cereal first, then you pour the milk in.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm like,
Who puts milk in? The thing that can be displaced, who puts that in first? It's weird to me.
I feel like you automatically, that was my question, but apparently sifting through just lists of these silly things that people disagree on, I don't know I've ever met somebody that just pours the milk first and then pours the cereal on top. I automatically, as a larger guy, I don't know if I can use the well, we'll just avoid terms that might offend people.
Who needs labels,
right? I want more cereal in the bowl, and I know that if I pour the cereal first, the milk will raise it up a little bit, and I get more cereal just naturally.
This seems logistically, you pass cereal and then the milk on top and over.
Yeah, so that's an argument out there. I'm glad we agree on that.
I struggle to think of the straw man that would disagree with that, but there are other pressing ones like pineapple on pizza, yay or nay? Toilet paper, which way do you put it on the roll? Is it Jif? Is it GIF? I talked about that one.
Yeah, and I thought we would use some of those for future episodes, but I think it's fun to kind of peel apart, the idea that some of these trivial things, we can laugh about it and disagree, but as you go up the spectrum of severity or seriousness of these arguments,
scale up the notion.
Where do we start getting into the parts where, okay, now we're getting serious, I told you about before we started the pecan versus pecan argument.
Yeah, caramel karma.
Yeah. I've always been pecan. So my wife grew up saying pecan, and I give her a hard time about it, but it's not something where it's like, make or break, whatever. It's, we know what we're talking about. Much the same way some people call me Bobby, some people call me Robert. I know who you're talking to,
Are there other people besides me to call you Bobby?
A few.
Really?
Same reasons. Basically from our conjoined past there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But I've always been somebody who's, I don't care, just call me whatever. I know who you're talking to. But same thing with those words. That's my attitude on it. If you call it caramel, if you call it caramel, you mentioned in your shorts earlier this week, the indecent thoughts and things like that. And sometimes, if somebody says it a way, that you don't say it, of course you might think about it for a second and go, oh, you're one of those,
One of those.
But, then it's harmless. You move on. It's like, okay, I say caramel. Some people say caramel. And I'm like, I don't understand you, but that's okay. You were just raised saying it that way,
And then there's guys like me, I interchange depending on the context.
So root and route?
I don't do root typically. I'm more of a route guy, but like with caramel or caramel, it's a question of whether or not it pours or it's solid. Now that's an arbitrary sort of way to look at it, but I've found that a lot of my preferences and things from pronunciation to my belief structure at large is oftentimes arbitrary. And I just, for some reason, drew a line in the sand within my own head. So I don't know if other people do the same thing, but
yeah, well, there's plenty of those. I think, the whole toilet paper thing, like we joked about that, and
That's a good one because it truly functions the same either way.
Yeah.
I think it's just a visual or aesthetic thing, but why am I applying aesthetic values to something like the toilet paper on a roll? That's weird.
Somewhere out there in the ether, as we like to say, there are instructions for how to put the roll on, and it goes the way we say, over the top.
Well, even that would
But
be arbitrary.
yeah, exactly. That's where it's like, oh,
Positive or negative. It's like they're interchangeable.
back to the whole, oh, all right, that's how you do it. All right, I guess I'll just whatever, right?
Yeah.
So what is that next step, you think? Like what is it that, like we worked in cellular for a long time, and you had the people that were diehard Apple,
Mm-hmm.
and you and I both lean diehard Android. I've been Samsung for years and years. I've used Google. I like them both.
I need to clarify because you're projecting to the void here that I'm one or the other, and I am not. I'm a ambidextrous operating system user. I'm holding an iPad in my hand right now.
Oh, that's
We're recording on an Android device as we speak.
Let's see, and that's
Each are a tool to me, and they both have their place. And I don't think there's a better tablet on the market than an iPad, but I would never carry a Apple iPhone as my primary pocket device that I use as a phone.
See, you learn something new every day. I've leaned Android, and it was because of, and I guess this kind of speaks to where we were going with this. My aversion to Apple was very much a experience thing where I bought one early on in my time at Verizon, and there were just multiple instances where having it and dealing with it left a bad taste in my mouth, or dealing with their issues through customers.
Mm-hmm.
And it just was like, okay, I don't ever run into this with these, and these seem more reliable. And then I got set in my ways,
I kind of relate to that, being in that industry for as long as I was and working for the specific company that we worked for. We were one of the last adopters of Apple as one of our manufacturers. And prior to that, we've got Android that is an operating system, developed by Google, but it's open source enough to where other manufacturers use it. You've got Samsung, you've got LG, you've got Google itself, you've got Chinese manufacturers that make fantastic devices at extremely affordable prices, all running with Android OS. And within that, as a representative of a large retailer of those Android products, there was a lot of what felt like a red carpet treatment from those manufacturers. Everyone from Google down to I don't know, LG. They were really good to us. They treated us like a valuable member of the process. And then we finally adopted Apple after much negotiation and many butthurt feelings. And the relationship that we had with Apple was quite the converse. It felt almost as if we were there to serve them versus them being a supplier of a product that we sell, like all the other Android manufacturers, really made us feel important and a valued customer. And that's why I initially had such a huge problem with Apple, is because of how I felt as though my organization and me were treated by Apple in relation to anyone who represented Android or anything on that side of the aisle. And so I guess politically did not care, or ideologically rather, I didn't really care for Apple. Having had a chance to get really acquainted with the products, I love both. But I guess, if I was pinned in a corner and had to say, which do you prefer? I'd probably say Android. I think that it's just a little bit better. Sorry, Apple people. And I know there's a lot of you. But if you're not a lover of Android, I don't think you've ever really used it.
I think the exclusivity, that whole, I've just had too many people in my experience try to convince me that theirs was better.
Yeah.
And
versus acknowledging that it's just a preference.
Yeah. And as an Android person, I'm just like, okay, let's take some pictures. What do we need to do here? I sell them. I interact with them, on a daily basis. What do I know? But
geez, do I have?
but I find if I was sitting here as I'm listening to you, and I find a funny segue from the characterizations that you just used and the way that they treated the company. It brings me to another, kind of interesting way people line up.
Mm-hmm.
Apple would be more like the cat people. And because cats and the way they treat you, they're like, you're just lucky that I'm here.
Yeah.
Don't touch my belly. Don't,
Versus dog people, they're so used to this eager creature.
Yeah.
Seemingly built just to love you,
Yeah.
regardless.
Yeah. So Android was just happy to roll out. And, right up until I left a couple of years back, even the Google guy would come in and he'd have pens and toys and all kinds of cool stuff. Samsung was the same way, and they knew that if they wanted to get the salespeople talking about their product, they would bring goodies, and that just was rewarding.
Just felt like it tried to earn our favor versus Apple, who allowed us to have their product finally.
Yeah. And so bringing that to cats and dogs, you'll have that same kind of mentality with, like people will be dog people or people will be cat people. And then there's people, of course, that are both.
Or those that are neither.
Yeah.
But it scales up from there. I mean, it's not just Mac versus PC. It's not just like Ford versus Chevy or things like that. It scales up. And when you start climbing up that weird ladder of ideology, you get into things like atheism versus religion. You get into things like Palestine versus Israel. You get into some really significant topics where there's actually things at stake. And by things, I mean things as valuable as human lives and the future of an entire, people. And that's where these preferences can scale to a place that is much more grave and it's much more serious. And the tone of the conversation goes from being lighthearted and playful to being something that people are willing to end relationships over. And as we've seen, unfortunately, throughout history, end lives over.
I think some of that leads from the ideology of, I mean, at least in my own perspective, I'm very much you do your thing, I'll do my thing, and as long as nobody's bothered, nobody's getting hurt, we're gonna be cool, right? Yeah, my faith is very much about sharing our faith, but I'm not gonna do it to the point where like there's a certain level of relationship building that needs to happen there, and even then it's you model it by your lifestyle and you model it through a relationship with a person instead of beating them over the head with it. So I think that's where my own values would lead to, as long as yours isn't impeding on mine and vice versa, let's just be, man. Let's coexist and whatever, not to use that, because I don't agree with that whole phraseology. I know there's a movement out there. I don't align with that. But the actual idea of coexisting, like you and I sitting on the couch here, we can believe different things and still have a cup of coffee and, shop in the same grocery stores and not want to kill each other. And I think that's where the questions of this episode are really kind of leading up to, like, what is it? What is that line where a disagreement becomes so,
well, it stands to infringe on
dividing,
some core aspects of the human experience, things like belonging, status, and tribe, and that self-concept, identity. When those things start to get diminished or pressed on this line that we're talking about, as gray of an area and as of a spectrum as it is, somewhere within that, people get pressed to a degree in which their response is a little different than just the snide comeback to pineapples on pizza. It becomes something more than that. When you're talking about more intense and more serious, for lack of a better term, topics within the framework of this discussion, like how we raise kids, abortion, LGBTQ plus rights, guns is a big one, especially here in America, religion and politics, things like that, free speech versus the movement of harm reduction through what we say to each other. Those things change the whole discussion, and more so, they change the response from those that feel as though that they are pressed too close to that line. And that's where we get into quite a bit more of a, I don't know, dramatic sort of a discussion.
Yeah, and you know, the the severity of the results if one doesn't go the way it's not supposed to is heightened in those situations too. And I think that people get just too caught up in the what ifs, and the hypotheticals. If this goes that way or the other, as opposed to maybe like I was mentioning at one point, just opening the door to sit down and talk about things. And like at the end of the day, we all have to share the same areas with people we don't necessarily like or agree with, and we have to find common ground. I personally can't think of a lot of things. In fact, I would say it's probably very few things that would heighten me to even violence, much less, killing somebody. And I just try to be chill. So when I see that people will kill for this or that, it's like, what is it about that particular thing that moves you that much?
Yeah.
And it's certainly not, Android versus iPhone. I'm like, if you disagree with me on that, cool. Go play with your iPhone. I don't, I'm not gonna fault you for. And I've often said, they're beautiful phones. It's just not the operating system for me.
I think it's when the topic again starts to press some less key areas, like, and there's factors within it like identity fusion, where people believe that their identity and beliefs are the same thing. And even through cognitive dissonance at times, they have to keep those two things fused. And that dictates a lot of behavior, especially when we look at extreme behaviors, up to and including violence. I think that's a big part of it. There's that notion of moral absolutism, where it's like my side is good and the other side is evil. It's black or white, binary thinking like that. I think it makes people that are already pressed and feeling as though their identity is being threatened, that when they look at it from the perspective of, well, that means they're evil and I'm good, it emboldens them to do things that are out of their own, typical behavior, out of their own realm of beliefs and morality. And you've got that notion of perceived existential threat, like where if they win, then I no longer exist. I think that notion, when it's held deeply and ingrained in a person's belief structure, I think that presses people into places that can look like violence.
Well, I think some of that's, as I was saying before, too, the hypothetical or theoretical, like if we allow this to blossom into what it seems like it's going to, then maybe I need to fight now. And it's like, or maybe we take a conversation route, and maybe we say, hey, I feel differently than you. And in this realm, can we maybe find an area of compromise? Because compromise, I think our society is losing the ability to compromise more than they're gaining it right now. And I think when you talk about these topics, I think that's what's missing is, like as they become more severe, the personalization of compromising and what you're willing to compromise on. It's like pick the topic. Are any of those uncompromising? Like, is there anything that we can't find some common ground, And I think as you look at that, that's where the line is, and some people's ability to compromise. Like what, like,
Without humility, people really struggle to steer into that notion of compromise.
yeah. Um, the question of where the topic escalates, I think, really comes down to, what are you willing to, and are you willing to stop and go, is this worth taking a life or losing my own life? Like,
Well, and understanding a notion that how you feel in that moment is oftentimes far different than how you feel 30 minutes or 30 days later. So, having enough impulse control to understand that when you're in a disagreement or you're being affected by an ideology that conflicts with yours in a negative way, how do you realize that that initial feeling of well, basically your nervous system being fully engaged with neurotransmitters designed to make you flee or fight? How do you convince yourself that maybe I need to take some time, maybe not to look at the other side's argument or even consider my own, but just to let those chemicals subside before I make a rash decision that I'm not able to come back from? I think that's what a lot of what we're experiencing is there's impulsive decisions being made at grand scales like war or involvement in conflicts, and we let our initial response to it be the thing that causes the undeniable and inevitable future. In other words, if you go too far with something, there's a line in which you can't come back from it. And I think to get to that line, we probably need to allow ourselves to attack with a little bit more intellect, a little bit less emotion. But how do you even do that? How do you do something like that, or even de-escalate a disagreement to begin with, in a world in which this social media algorithms and the divisive politics that we have, and leaders that are executing within important, powerful positions, specifically working through propaganda to make you hate the other side? How do you traverse that? How do you get yourself into a situation where you can stop, let yourself calm down, and think rationally when all of the external forces are pushing you to make that decision right now and to convince you that if you don't, that you're a bad person, you're betraying your own values? I don't think it's ever been more difficult in society, for society, to have that moment of pause, introspection, and allowing a calming of the nervous system before making decisions. It's rewarded with clicks and views. You know what I mean? It's rewarded with accolade from a community of people you'll never meet. And that makes it really hard to be civil in civilization these days.
I think we need to think outside of labels. I think that we need to recognize, as much as it hurts sometimes, that person that you don't agree with, in my own convictions, it would say, and we've had various sermons that, say, if you're hating on somebody, God created them too, so like you're hating on one of God's creation, and who are you to pass that kind of judgment, if you will? Sure. Because, God loved them enough to create them, give them life, all that stuff. But it's remove God from that equation, and just in the humanity of the situation, that's somebody's son or daughter. That's somebody's somebody, and and that's the,
I think you got this algorithm pumping information into your eyes every single day, eyes and ears, about how the other side is not those things. They're not a person. They are this ideology. They are this side of the aisle. They are your adversary. And it really seems to compel people into this notion that, let me just say this, it seems to remove humanity from half the equation.
It does.
That way, when you're committing an act of violence or even just berating somebody through a comment section of a YouTube short, you're not berating a person, you're berating an idea. And you allow yourself, convince yourself rather, that it is not another person. Therefore, the civility, the golden rule, all of these things that we condition ourselves with as humans, to be kind to each other, all those things are removed. and you're actually fighting the good fight, or you're doing God's work, or you're being a hero to your cause. And there's just such a reward for treating others as if they're not as valuable as you. And it's really striking. And I don't know if it's always been that way or if it's been amplified by social media, but I will say that social media does a damn good job of pumping those notions into our minds. And it's just one more layer that we have to contend with during this already tumultuous time in which we live.
I think it's probably got a lot to do with the availability and abundance of information too. I think we've talked about it in the past. I don't think we've brought it up on the podcast yet, and maybe there's something to talk about in the future, but the abundance of information, our brains are overwhelmed by information so much anymore. And I've heard the argument that we're not designed to have this much information at our fingertips and to be processing this much information all the time.
We evolved for it, but it's here. And one thing humans, we can all agree on, what we do well is adapt. The question is why are we adapting in this way? Why are we using this tool for bad instead of good? Because it's not the abundance, as you put it, of information is the issue. It's what we're doing with said abundance.
Yeah.
Why is it we're allowing ourselves to evolve into a way in which we use it like this?
Well, and where I was going with that is, as you were talking about, has it always been this way? I was thinking of that 70s show and Red. I don't know if you've watched that 70s show. Yeah.
I watched.
And you get that mentality of there was certain disdain for, commies, if you will, or things like that.
Definitely represented the establishment.
Yeah. And so I would say it definitely existed. Maybe it just didn't come in so many flavors.
Sure.
Maybe. I don't know. Sure. And now that it comes in so many flavors, maybe we're a little overwhelmed with how to digest it, to keep that,
clearly. But again, with this sensation of being overwhelmed, is it our choice to use and engage with this information in a way that's so malicious, or is it just naturally what humans gravitate towards, or is it a synthetic, sort of sentiment that's being injected by the information itself? What's confusing to me is why we have this beautiful tool that's something unique to our era that's never been experienced before, of being able to have answers and information and knowledge at the drop of a hat. I mean, on our fingertips is the answer to any question you could ever really have. And instead of using that to grow our society into one that, resembles more like this utopian vision that I'm sure we all dream of eventually having as a society, we're using it as a tinder to burn the fucking whole thing down.
Yeah, I was in a disagreement with somebody close to me. I am trying to avoid specifics as much as possible, in this format. But I was in a disagreement with somebody close to me, and I was just like, it was getting out of hand, and I tried to remove some of the layers and just be like, look, here's what we need to do. We're going to disagree on some of these things, but a lot of them are out of our control too. What we can control is loving our family, focusing on our jobs, keep our head down, and, let's focus on our bubble, if you will, and I think that the overwhelming ideology out there right now is that you have to pick a larger bubble, and you got to be willing to fight for it. And it's like, maybe, but
then there's certain bubbles that seem morally wrong to not have a stance within, to not take a side or another. I think one that comes to mind, especially with the unfortunate and most recent events, is Palestine, Israel. That conflict is clearly very, very massive. There's a lot of bloodshed, too many children. Any child being killed in the conflict of adults is bad enough, but to see the scope of devastation and death and destruction and not feel strongly about it, to me seems unreasonable. And within my framework of thought, I'm incapable of not choosing a side. And as much as I hate to put too much thought into things that I have very little control over and are happening on the other side of the world, and it's so divisive within our country, I'm incapable of not having thoughts on it. And what do we do with those types of things? I mean, it's grave enough to where if we don't do something now, we should have done something decades ago, but children continue to die. And I don't know. I mean, I'm obviously not alone in that notion. I mean, many of us, especially out here on social media, we all choose one side or another. And it seems virtually impossible at this point. If there is anyone left that's indifferent about it, but when you're on one of those sides, how do you not, I don't know, engage with that? I struggle to find rationale and how anyone could be in favor of us continuing to fund a country that is clearly using those funds to destroy another people and to commit a genocide. And the other side is saying that that's not even what's happening. Yet I've got eyes, I've got ears, I see it every day. Whether it's propaganda or not, one thing about our age is that it's full of real-time information, and I am seeing these things happen. And it's just hard for me to understand, A, how someone could not see it for objectively what it is, and B, not have any opinion on it. It doesn't affect you directly in this moment, but without empathy, I guess you could probably get away with not having feelings about it. But if you're a person who has eyes, has a cell phone, and has any degree of empathy, how on earth do you see something like that and not have strong feelings?
I think the roundtable idea that I mentioned in an earlier episode, this one comes to mind for this. I think giving everything its place, because there's got to be a place for civil discourse about these matters, and the very nature of what we talk about, agree to disagree. Like, and I'm not saying one way or the other. I don't know enough about the conflict. I just can say at a glance, it needs to stop. Like if I look at something like that, I'm like, I learned at a young age, mom was going to stop the fight, regardless of who started it. And somebody needs to be mom in this situation and go, knock it off, but I know that's an oversimplification, but where I'm going with that is using formats like this, using conversations like the one we're having, people need to be more open to that. And on both sides of any argument, it needs to be, okay, we disagree. We disagree on, how this should be handled. But you need to hear my side and I need to hear your side. And then maybe one of us will learn something that we didn't know,
And obviously that's what we have. Yeah. But what do you do when during that discussion there's children being murdered?
Well, yeah,
it's just when it scales up to that degree, I think that's what we're getting at, is that's what pushes people across that line into the realm of violence and mayhem, or whatever you want to call it, whatever side you're on. I think that's what does it. Sometimes the situation and the topic at hand is so grave and there's so much at stake that there really isn't time for deliberation, because every moment spent on deliberating stops some sort of intervention from happening. But even make it worse when you start throwing money at one of those sides, then you, by proxy, are now on that side. And that's one of the things we're seeing with that conflict. And that's just one of many throughout history in which we can observe us just as a nation behaving in that way, whether it's which side of the war we join or whether we decide to stay in it or out of it, what we do once we've decided to take action on it. So I don't know. I mean, what you're saying, I definitely appreciate and agree with, that rational discussions where empathy is involved, but logic is at the helm is really the cure for these things. And had those things been employed prior to a conflict arising, it probably would have resulted in a much different type of process being the overall outcome. But clearly, after hundreds of centuries, frankly, we see it happening. And unlike what we profess, in all of our schooling about how if you don't learn history, then you're doomed to repeat the past. That seems to be the modus operandi that we as civilization have taken. We see these fantastic sort of situations play out through history that basically give us an open book test for the future, and we continue to keep the book closed. Blows my mind.
Try and just don't mention it.
So strange.
Yeah. The knee-jerk reaction, I think people feel helpless in some of those scenarios to effectively do what needs to be done. So they just look for something to do and somewhere to point that energy. And I think we need to be more constructive with where we point the energy and how we point the energy. And what that would be, like just if we're going to stay on that, we have voting. We have the right to peaceful protest. We have, these things that we can do as a society that we can agree that these are the ways that we go about it. Use them correctly. Use them wisely. Wisdom in those situations and discernment need to be applied. And if you're really passionate about it, by all means, use wisdom and discernment to educate people about what's actually going on. And I think that applies to any of these, but I totally see where you're coming from, that it adds a layer of, I got to do something about this now, because it's so, like, every moment I don't do something about this in this scenario, maybe, a number of children die, and what do we do about it? And that's where I hope that this format would help to educate people, like bring credible information, educate people about the situation that's going on, and then educate them about the proper channels that they can use to combat that situation. For instance, in this, just off the cuff here, I would say next time voting happens, vote for the people who are going to make the change, as hard as that is to suss out anymore. Educate people around you, really do the research, do your due diligence. But if you've got the means, go and be part of the solution. Send supplies to the people that are affected by these causes. Use your energy to raise awareness that there's still people alive that need food, that need shelter, and, funnel that energy that you've got, that angst, into being a productive part of the,
So I think that's a little bit of what we do here. We're at least trying to lay the foundation for doing our part. And specifically in fostering civil discussions for two people that don't see eye to eye on, certain political or spiritual things, but still being able to set aside time every week to have a conversation in which we really are truly trying to help the other side articulate their perspective so that we can better understand it. And I just, at times, wish that there was a pill that people could take that would force them to want to consider the other side's perspective, at least enough to have a better understanding of it. We talk about some of these more intense and important, high stakes sort of topics, things like religion and politics, or guns, or vaccines is one that's been in the media a lot lately, and for good reason, or welfare versus bootstrap culture. I think those things are highly charged and could spark hours of debate to varying degrees of heat. But as we wrap up, I just want to throw one of them out there that's a bit lower stakes, but still highly contentious. So I'll ask you, Marvel or DC?
Ooh, I'm a Marvel guy. I have to, like, my childhood lends to, I literally just bought 2 Wolverine shirts because he's one of my favorites. Not that I don't like DC. It's just like, I guess I like all of them, but if I could only pick one, it'd be Marvel, just because the richness of the characters. And I got buddies that are Superman guys and Batman guys. They're gonna give me such a hard time.
Well,
But I mean, the characters that you have, like, I mean, who doesn't love Deadpool?
gotta love a guy who's breaking the fourth wall or doing it with thrill and humor.
Yeah,
Admittedly, I'm a big fan of Batman. I love his character being somebody who is just a normal human person, no special powers aside from immense wealth and top-notch, best-in-class Ivy League education and things, an immense amount of resource. But aside from that, a completely normal guy who's also, in my humble opinion and that of many others, the greatest detective that exists in literature, period. And you also got Dr. Manhattan on that side. And I can't think of a superhero, or whatever you would call him, the force of nature at this point, who's more capable with his abilities and skills. But admittedly, if I had to choose a side without any hesitation, I would say Marvel. It's what I grew up on. I was a big comic book aficionado, if you will, in the 90s, which I still think is the best runs for most of the big titles was the 90s. That's where you had Hulk as this fused thing between Bruce Banner and Hulk. We had Smart Hulk. You had Wolverine running around the backwoods with Jubilation Lee. I mean, it was just a really good time for story writing. So I would say because of that and my nostalgia associated with it, I'm a diehard Marvel guy.
yeah. I grew up with the X-Men
Oh, yes.
on the weekends, and
All the animated series. Yeah.
yeah. I had Spider-Man in the afternoon after school. But I also had Batman.
I
So
love Batman.
yeah.
That's one of the greatest animated series of all time.
I think Team Marvel. Yeah.
Well, whether you're DC or Marvel, I would encourage you, after wrapping up with this episode, you'll maybe go to the streaming services and see which of your favorite animated series from back in the day are free and available, and maybe take a little dip into the pool of nostalgia. But I think that wraps up another episode of Agree to Disagree and Still Be Friends. Thank you all for joining us. And until next time, this is Jason.
And I'm Robert.
And looking forward to seeing you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.